Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of Clutch Scoops. We are your hosts, Tomer Azarly, NBA reporter for ClutchPoints. As always, I'm here with Brett Siegel, our NBA insider. Brett, before we jump into the craziness, you doing all right? You hanging in there, man?
We got 3 weeks till the trade deadline. Obviously, there's no sleep right now, Tomer, so we will wait to go into hibernation until after the trade deadline.
Yeah, this is going to be a very, very busy. Appears to be a very busy trade deadline over the next 3 weeks here. I want to jump right into it. The one everyone's talking about now that Trae Young has been traded to the Washington Wizards. We're still eyeing Anthony Davis, but for now, the biggest name is Ja Morant. Ja Morant, most recently in the news for a viral video, which appeared to have an exchange with teammate Vince Williams while the team is in Berlin for the international European games. They play a game in Berlin, a game in London before they head back to the States, playing the Orlando Magic. Obviously, Desmond Bane, a former teammate there, so a little bit more than just a regular game. That video went viral, sparking a lot of debate about what Ja Morant's future actually looks like. So, Brett, let's start with this. What is the latest we're hearing about Ja Morant?
It's a very fascinating situation because we kind of saw this coming way back in October when there was that feud with Tomas Isolo and John Morant in that locker room where the coaches went after him, challenging his leadership, challenging his effort. After that Halloween loss to the Lakers, Morant clapped back at them and he had some things to say. Some players sided with the coaches, some sided with Morant. And those tensions never really went away, even though the Grizzlies teams were pursuing Morant. The Grizzlies continued to tell them that they were not going to trade him. That Zach Kleiman made that very clear that he was not on the market. John never asked for a trade, and they weren't interested in trading him. But there's some new intel coming out of Memphis, Tomer, since then, and we have a story going live on Clutch Points to kind of discuss it a little bit. After that heated exchange with Islo, Ja hasn't been the same emotionally or mentally. There's been multiple Grizzly players that have noted this, and team sources have indicated to us as well that there was almost like a silent trade request in a way from John Morant, where he didn't necessarily say, I want to be traded, this is where I want to go. But it was more like he doesn't see it working out there in Memphis. And he doesn't get along with Isolo. There's a split in the locker room right now between the players who respect Ja and those who don't, like I mentioned. And Ja's answers to reporters in Berlin, where they're playing a game right now, the Grizzlies and Magic on Amazon Prime, they're playing, but Ja did his media session. He did not sound too reassuring about wanting to remain in Memphis. He was basically like, well, what did they say when he was asked about what the front office was thinking about trading him and whether or not he wanted to be there. So there's just a lot of talk to him right now, and obviously that's one of the big dominoes that could fall before the trade deadline.
Morant obviously eligible for a 3-year, $178 million extension this summer. From what I've been told, the Grizzlies have never been offering that from the start of the season. I know that that has had John Morant feeling a certain way and his camp feeling a certain way. I think the Grizzlies, from what I've heard, are closer to that 3-100 number, which is obviously far below what Ja would expect or command as a max star in this league. And so we'll see what the Grizzlies end up getting for him. He's owed, 126 million over the next 3 years. So whoever is getting him is not getting him on some expiring deal. They're committed here for a good stretch, a couple years here to see what they have in John Morant. So if a team were to trade for John Morant, Brett, like what are we seeing? Like I think as of last week, there wasn't much of a market from what I was hearing. It was more of Zach Kleiman trying to muster up a market for John Morant. What are you hearing about the current market for John Morant?
So there's a couple things to touch on here. I think the first is the Grizzlies side of things, where Zach Kleiman and the Grizzlies have made it clear that this is not going to be a salary dump move like the Trae Young move with the Atlanta Hawks, where they got C.J. McCollum and Corey Kispert, and that was it. There will be draft picks involved, at least one first round pick the Grizzlies want, and they also want young talent, and they've made that very clear to teams that have since reached out to the Grizzlies that they're not just going to be willing to give him up. So what teams are potentially interested? Well, many have reported this, and we can report it as well, that the Heat are interested in John Morant. But what price would they be willing to pay for him? I think that's what could dictate what happens with Morant over the next 3 weeks. It would be something revolving around Terry Rozier's expiring contract, Simone Fontecchio's expiring contract, but that's not enough for Memphis. They want the draft assets, they want the young players. So would Miami be willing to part with a guy like Nikola Jovic or Jaime Jaquez Jr.? Those are two guys that I would surely keep an eye on in those trade talks between Miami and Memphis. And then obviously a protected first round pick. Would the Heat give up a 2027 or 2028 protected pick? And would the Grizzlies even be willing to accept protections on said pick for a guy that was a rookie of the year not too long ago, a multi time All Star, and one of the most dynamic guards in this league when he has the ball in the open court? He can still be a star in the NBA. So that's kind of where things are at right now. There's nothing really imminent on this front. If Ja Morant is to be moved, I would expect it to happen either the day before the trade deadline or right at the trade deadline. But I think that it's worth noting that Miami has serious interest there, especially because they wouldn't have to go all out for Morant. You could give up those assets like we mentioned. Maybe you do give up Jovic and or a guy like Jaime Jaquez, and you could still have leverage in the offseason to then open the door and pursue Giannis with guys like Andrew Wiggins, Khalil Ware, draft picks there that you still have if you're the Heat. So I think that there's a realistic path to them getting Ja Morant. The only other team that we've really heard here is Sacramento, but I do want to say that the Kings do not want to give up any draft picks for Ja Morant, and they would only do a Trae Young like trade for him. And so the Grizzlies don't want to do that. That's all that the Kings are willing to give up. There's really not much else of a market there. Could Toronto get involved? Potentially, but I don't see that happening. Minnesota's not in the market. Houston's not in the market. So it's really just looking like number one, the Miami Heat. Number two, the Kings discount. Or number three, they keep Morant and they figure things out in the offseason.
Another interesting aspect that we have to discuss here is that Terry Rozier is currently under investigation for the old gambling probe. So there's some uncertainty or just lack of clarity as to whether Rozier can even be traded. I know he's an expiring deal. I think $26.6 million what he's owed this year, and then after that he's off the books. But there's questions about whether he can be traded. Do the Heat even want to get involved in that? Can there be some reversal if the investigation does show something? So that's certainly something to monitor as the trade deadline nears with Ja Morant and Miami Heat. I do want to move on to the second biggest name, I would say. Warriors fans are celebrating today, but they haven't gotten much to celebrate about yet. Jonathan Kuminga, as of today, eligible to be traded. We haven't seen too much movement on that front as far as rumors go. I know Warriors fans want him gone. It seems like he wants to be gone. We saw something today about him requesting a demand, but that seems to have been something from the start, Brett. Is that correct?
He basically did that over the summer when he and his agent Aaron Turner explicitly told the Warriors his wishes to play somewhere else. And before they ended their stare down of restricted free agency, he was open to playing for the Suns. He was open to playing for the Heat, the Kings. He did not want to go back to the Warriors. So today's news of him demanding a trade, it's not shocking. It's not new necessarily. And quite honestly, Tomer, it's just more of what Warriors fans already know at this point, that the team is actively looking to move Kuminga.
Jonathan Kuminga signed a 2-year, $46.8 million deal this past summer, late in the summer. I would even say in the fall, with a trade kicker and a team option for next season. So obviously, whoever's trading for him is going to get a bit of a bump in the pay there, obviously for Kuminga. But there's a team option there. He did decline the qualifying offer last season, which would have made him an unrestricted free agency this upcoming summer, which obviously changed a lot of things. I think it was in no one's benefit for him to take that because the Warriors were losing for nothing. He would potentially lose out on the payday. So, what are we looking at as far as a potential market for Kuminga right now? Who are the top teams to watch right now with him?
The Warriors have been talking with teams over the last 2 months to try to have a game plan for these 3 weeks once Kuminga becomes trade eligible. That happened today, January 15th. And so I wouldn't say that the market is completely dead like some are speculating out there, especially because there are 4 to 5 legitimate teams with genuine interest in him right now. I don't think that a deal is close to getting done by any means. It probably won't be until the week of the deadline or right before, just like Ja Morant's case, because any deal is going to involve multiple teams here, Tomer, because Jonathan Kuminga, the destinations that he would want to go to and teams that would want him, it's very few, and it's not like the entire league would want that contract. So some of those teams that we're continuing to bring up, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Dallas Mavericks, the Sacramento Kings, they all have definite 100% interest in Jonathan Kuminga. There's been speculation about the Bulls having interest. The Lakers have appeared as of late. But in terms of Los Angeles, they don't have anything that the Warriors would want. So if the Lakers were to get Jonathan Kuminga, again, that would have to be a multi-team trade where the Warriors can get the assets that they want somewhere else. Maybe the Lakers could be a third team in a deal other than Sacramento there. So something just to keep an eye on. But there's just simply a lot of posturing going on here, Tomer, between the Warriors, other teams to try to gain traction in any negotiations that are going on. And we see this happen all the time around the trade deadline. We saw it last year. We've seen it with big star players that were going to be on the move. There was even the stuff with Brandon Ingram about other teams potentially getting involved when it was either the Hawks or the Raptors the entire time. So we can confirm at this point with 100% confidence that the Warriors and the Nets have directly spoken with one another since the start of 2026. We've wrote about it multiple times on ClutchPoints in our most recent intel story. And of course, Michael Porter Jr. was brought up in those conversations. Now, whether or not the Warriors are truly in on Michael Porter Jr. and do view him as their top trade target, that's the big question at hand. But they've talked about it multiple times internally, and seeing as they've already talked about it with the Nets, I have to imagine that there's at least a handful of people in that front office, maybe even Joe Lacob, who like the idea of packaging guys for Michael Porter Jr. So I wouldn't write that off just yet. It's certainly still an option that they're talking about, but again, you have to find a third or fourth team involved because the Nets do not want Jonathan Kuminga whatsoever. And it seems like, based on the reporting and the conversations that I've spoken with the Warriors, it's that they're still sorting through options at this time, Tomer. So there's still a lot to unpack here. It's not just Michael Porter Jr. or bust, but there is certainly interest there.
Now, I think there's a report also that came out that I don't think any of us frankly believe, but I would like to give you the opportunity to shut it down. The Warriors are willing to hold on to Jonathan Kuminga past the trade deadline to do this again for an entire calendar year for whatever reason. They did it last year. It seemed like he was very much on the outs last season, was not in a fixture of the rotation, especially after the Warriors acquired Jimmy Butler. We went through the whole playoff series where once Steph Curry went down, Kuminga got a chance to shine, but obviously they lost that series. That summer we heard, the Warriors aren't scared to keep Kuminga. They're not scared to keep Kuminga. Is that the case once again? Are they going to go through this again through the trade deadline?
I do not see that happening. I feel like it's some kind of taunt, whether it's the Warriors to Kuminga, whether it's the Warriors to another team. I'm not on those phone calls with them and the other team, so I don't know exactly what is being discussed there. I don't know if there's any world in which they bring back Jonathan Kuminga past the trade deadline and it being rainbows and butterflies and everything's a-okay. He's going to come back and play. That wouldn't be the case at all. It's just a very ugly situation. It's toxic. Kuminga doesn't want to be there. Steve Kerr doesn't want him, and it doesn't make sense for them to keep him past this trade deadline. And the only way I could see this happening, Tomer, in terms of the Warriors actually keeping Jonathan Kuminga and everybody being thrown off their track, is if they had talks with Giannis's camp. And it is worth mentioning that he and Stephen Curry are both represented by Octagon. And so Jeff Austin, who represents Stephen Curry, Alex Sartis, who represents Giannis, I can't say that they've talked about it, but maybe that is a conversation that's been had of, hey, would our clients want to play together? And if the Warriors truly feel that there's a possibility of them going to get Giannis, and I'm just going to say this now, Tomer, this is going to get aggregated like crazy. I already know it. But the only way that I see them holding on to Jonathan Kuminga is if they use him in a larger trade in the summer to get Giannis. That's the only way that they would hold on to him, if there's some kind of confirmation that they can go and pursue Giannis. But again, that would be tampering. There's a lot that would go into that behind the scenes, and I don't see it being a possibility. We've wrote about it, we've reported about it, that Jonathan Kuminga is the most likely player to get traded before February 5th, and I continue to believe that.
Okay, we will continue to monitor the Jonathan Kuminga situation, which I'm sure will be very eventful over the next several weeks. That moves us to one of the other hottest trade discussed in recent rumors, I would say. Anthony Davis, prior to last week, felt like was going to end up being an Atlanta Hawk. Suffered a hand injury that, you know, we went through some social media thing where, he was rumored to undergo season-ending hand surgery. He came out and said that was lies, and he came out and said that he's not going to have a season-ending hand surgery, only going to be out several months. What what is his market? Does the hand injury change the Atlanta Hawks' position on trading for AD?
I think it changes the mentality of what some of these teams would be willing to give up, because maybe not the Hawks as much because they're not in a position to win right now. But one example I'll bring up, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, the Milwaukee Bucks, a team like that. Let's say that they really wanted Anthony Davis and they were going to pursue him. Well, they would be doing that as a win now move. And Davis, if you trade for him right now, is not a win now move because he's going to be out at least 2 months, probably going to be out past the end of the regular season with this hand injury. If he was looking at getting hand surgery and he had to see multiple specialists to get second and third confirmations on this, and now he's just going to be out 2 months, there's obviously something going on there that's more serious than has been reported. And so the indications right now are that the Mavs want to move Anthony Davis, but not in the way that the Hawks moved off Trae Young. So similar boat as the Memphis Grizzlies with Ja Morant. They're not just going to sell him for nothing. They want to try to get some value back, not just a salary dump move. So probably not going to get that at the trade deadline right now, Tomer. I don't see that happening where a team is going to give up multiple draft picks or multiple young talents for a guy like Anthony Davis, where he's played what, 15, 20 games since joining the Mavericks?
Yeah, it's not been much. I think he and Kyrie played 25 minutes together, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, since he got there. So I do have to ask though. Obviously the Atlanta Hawks package with Anthony Davis would include a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, I believe, in addition to maybe Zachary Ricochet. Porzingis has not played much recently due to his strange illness that he's been dealing with. I believe it's called POTS. Zachary Ricochet is obviously going through a bit of a maybe I don't want to say hit a rookie wall, but they have a lot of guards there, a lot of talent there, so he's trying to figure it out. Is that package still what intrigues Dallas, or what is the package that does intrigue Dallas? What does that look like? Is it young players? Is it draft picks? Is it both?
I think if there was a legitimate offer from the Hawks of Porzingis, Luke Kennard, and Ricochet, and then there was that 2026 draft pick included from the Cavaliers, which is looking like it's going to be somewhere right after the lottery or early 20s, I think that would be a package that they would absolutely consider for Anthony Davis because they're getting a young player that they can look to develop on the wing. They're getting a draft pick to add somebody this year next to Cooper Flag. So I would absolutely think that that would be the best trade package there. The only problem is that the Hawks have pushed back hard about including Zachary Ricochet, even though those reports came out that Dallas thought that he was going to be included in trade dialogue. The Hawks said no, no, no. But again, it's posturing season, Tomer. We'll figure out after the trade deadline what was actually real and what wasn't when teams actually talk about those negotiations. So I don't see the Hawks giving up anything more than Porzingis and Kennard at this time. Maybe they would include the draft pick there, but you have to find a way to get to 80 salary match. Zachary Ricochet would be that piece. I don't see it happening. Another team there that has been mentioned for Anthony Davis as of late, the Toronto Raptors, and we keep hearing that the Toronto Raptors are in the market to make a significant upgrade. Whether or not they can or not, it depends on what this market shapes up to be and how willing the Raptors are to move off of some of their assets. But we've been told that they want to keep one of Immanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett and not get rid of them both. We'll see what happens with Toronto. There's obviously concerns about Jakob Poeltl's back injury to this point and whether or not it will linger longer in the year. But one thing I do want to mention, other than the Sabonis and Anthony Davis stuff that we've been hammering with Toronto, I would I would venture to say that this is a team that could wait until the offseason to make their big move. Maybe they make some small margin moves around the trade deadline. They dip below the tax. They address their front court. But one player I would keep an eye on in the offseason is Jaren Jackson Jr. And the reason I mention that is the Memphis Grizzlies have made it clear that if they do move off of Ja Morant, it's going to be to surround Jackson with young players and have him be the focus of their rebuild. Well, does that interest Jackson? Does he want to be a part of a rebuild, or does he want to be a part of a team that wants to contend now? And how will the implications of a jaw trade impact Jaren Jackson's market in the offseason? So I would definitely keep an eye on that in terms of Toronto being an option for Jaren Jackson. But again, that's not something that would happen until the summer. And another interesting name, real quick, before I throw it back to you, Tomer, I want to bring up is Yves Missy from the New Orleans Pelicans. He's an interesting name that isn't one that the Pelicans have definitively said that they will not trade, like Trey Murphy, like Herb Jones, Zion Williamson ahead of this trade deadline. He's available right now, and he's going to be one of the best big men on the market if they truly do want to move him because he still has plenty of years left on that rookie contract. He's coming off an all rookie season. And the Pelicans, I have heard, do have interest in Benedict Mathurin from the Indiana Pacers, which aligns a little bit with what the Steinline reported recently of Missy being on the Pacers' radar. So you kind of connect the dots here. Well, the Pelicans like Mathurin, the Pacers need a big man. They've been talking with the Pelicans. Maybe there's something there, but I am definitely confident in saying that the Raptors will add a big man before the trade deadline. And I don't think it's that they're going to make a big move. I think it's going to be a smaller move to try to dip below the tax.
I feel like there's something to be said here before we move on about the teams or the players seeking, like, Rich Paul is obviously seeking a max extension for Anthony Davis. We know Ja is seeking a max extension. Like, Trey's eligible for one soon. He's probably going to want one. Like, it's almost like a pre-free agency move where we saw Brandon Ingram get traded to the Toronto Raptors and get a big extension. Teams who don't want to pay guys, instead of just letting him get to free agency, they're trading him and making pre-free agency moves, and those new teams are offering him extensions. How much do you think that kind of factors into moves like whatever Anthony Davis ends up, wherever Anthony Davis ends up going, or wherever Ja Morant ends up going?
I think it 100% impacts it. And like you mentioned, we saw it last year with Brandon Ingram. He went to a spot where he knew he could get a contract extension, and that happened. Same thing this year with Trey Young. Him and his camp know that the Wizards will give him a contract extension at some point and keep him there for the foreseeable future. So it is almost like pre-free agency in a way. And we kind of saw that happening even before all these apron rules came into play. I think it was like 2018, 2019, we started seeing the trade deadline really take a turn for what it is now, where it's pre-free agency, and these guys that have 1 or 2 years left on their contracts are trying to go somewhere where they know the team values them and wants them long term. So it is a very interesting point that you bring up, and I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, it seems like it's impacting quite a lot in the landscape of the NBA. Moving on to the Milwaukee Bucks and their trade path towards improving the roster in any shape or form. They've been trying. They know Giannis Antetokounmpo wants to play for a contender. It's been very clear. I'm sure he said the right things in public and in front of the media, but behind closed doors, I'm sure he's told them, hey, he wants to play for a contender. We got to make some moves, and we've talked about Miles Turner being that move, and they're still lacking some pieces around Giannis. We've discussed Bobby Portis, Kyle Kuzma as potentially their best assets, if you want to call them that, towards improving the roster. So where do the Bucks really stand on improving their roster? What are their paths to doing so?
Well, you got Kuzma and Portis. That's about $35 million in contracts right there. And then if you throw in that 2031 first round pick, kind of an enticing package. And the reason I say that is because that 2031 pick is going to be well past Giannis's time with Milwaukee. He won't be there then. You don't know what the Bucks organization is going to look like. Bobby Portis, obviously a smaller contract, not a lot to take on for any team. And we mentioned last week, Tomer, on the show and in our intel story, there's multiple teams out there that do have interest in Bobby Portis. So maybe you could get back some second round picks there. And then Kyle Kuzma, he's on a declining contract, and he will be in the final year of his deal next year. He's been shooting it well on the wing. You know what you're getting with Kuzma. He's been a part of a championship contending organization in the Lakers before. So maybe it's not the worst package out there when you throw in that 31 pick, but I really don't have an answer for you, Tomer, of what this team is going to potentially do, because we've heard Zach LaVine, we've heard Jeremy Grant, Michael Porter Jr. Those seem to be the three big names that they've been connected to, but what other upgrades are out there at this trade market? And there's just no answers, because I don't think that they can get involved for Anthony Davis. They don't have what the Mavericks would want. Same can be said about Ja Morant. They don't have the assets that the Grizzlies would want unless they're willing to accept that 2031 pick and figure it out with Kuzma and Portis. Maybe they reroute them somewhere else to get what they want. But they're buyers. I just don't know what they're going to buy at this time.
There's also something to be said about the fact that I think, well, the entire league knows that the Bucks are facing an immense amount of pressure to keep Giannis happy. And if he's not happy, he's going to request a trade. And so I do wonder how much of the Bucks' lack of trade partners has to do with the fact that some teams around the league might want to try and nudge Giannis out the door, nudge him towards a, not a report, but a Golden State, a San Francisco, a New York Knicks, a Miami, San Antonio, like whatever team has the ability to maybe sign him or trade for him. I think they want to try and nudge him out that door. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'll put it this way, Tomer. We reported over the summer about the Heat listening to offers for Andrew Wiggins, and one of the teams that was interested in him is the Milwaukee Bucks. That never went anywhere. The Heat weren't willing to talk with the Bucks, and why do you think that is? And now we see the talks of, oh, well, the Heat may be a suitor for Giannis. We heard that earlier this year. We're going to hear it again in the summer. It makes a lot of sense. Why would you want to deal with a team in which you know that their star player may request a trade and he's going to be number one on your list? Not just if you're the Miami Heat, but almost every other team around the league. They're going to want a guy like Giannis. So it makes a ton of sense there. We just really don't know what's going to happen. Giannis told Sam Amick of The Athletic in that terrific interview recently. If you haven't read it, if you're somebody out there that has not read that interview, highly recommend doing so. Giannis talked with Sam Amick on his way to the buses. I believe it was after the Warriors game in San Francisco, and he was very transparent with him about what he wants with the Bucks and the direction that he sees things going. He keeps saying that he will not request a trade, but how long is Giannis really waiting on this franchise and willing to wait around? And so I think that's the question many organizations around this league are asking. And like you mentioned, that's why some teams aren't willing to discuss trades with the Bucks at this time.
That leads us to our final segment of today's show, the very intriguing guard market. There are teams out there who need point guards, and there are teams out there who are certainly trying to move off point guards, whether it's roster depth, whether it's financial ramifications, first apron restrictions, there are a lot of teams who are trying to make some moves. So who are some of the guys? Obviously, we have a couple pictured, but let's start with Immanuel Quickley. What are the Raptors looking at with Immanuel Quickley? Who are some teams looking at Immanuel Quickley as a potential upgrade for their roster?
Well, I've been told that the Raptors are very willing to discuss Immanuel Quickley in trade talks at this time, whether or not he remains on their roster. Again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about with the Raptors before of, can they pull off a big move before this trade deadline? And if that move isn't there and they're going to wait till the offseason to look at guys like Jaren Jackson or somebody else, Obviously, I think then Quickly stays, but you're looking at a very interesting contract right now because he signed that 5 year, I believe it was 160 million with the Raptors that began in 2024. Including this season, he still has 4 more years left. He's going to be under contract through 2028 with whether it's the Raptors or whatever team he finds himself on. So is that really a deal that any team wants to tie themselves down to, especially in today's age of the NBA, where we're seeing organizations look to dump salary? I mean, a perfect example is a guy like Malik Monk in Sacramento. They've had trouble over the last year just trying to move him because he has 3 more years left on his contract at 18 million. Now you're talking about Quickly, who's making almost double that and has another year. He has 4 years left on his contract. So I wouldn't say there's a market for him. Could I see a team potentially swooping in and getting him, whether that's the Bucks or the Grizzlies, depending on what happens with the moves that they make? Absolutely. But I think it just really depends on what teams out there make substantial moves at the trade deadline and whether or not they're going to need a young guard like Quickly and they're willing to take him in there. But Emmanuel Quickly, I wouldn't say that there's a definitive market there. It's just the Raptors are open to discussing him in trade talks, and I think that that's something, Tomer, that we're going to see play out more in the summer.
Another couple guys, actually a couple guys who have been linked to the Clippers. And before I touch on that, I wanted to give you the floor to give some of your reporting on this. Anfernee Simons, Collin Sexton, two guys who have been linked to the Clippers in recent days. What do you have on them?
So it's kind of funny. We'll rank them from the most likely to be traded to the most unlikely guy to be traded. We'll start with Collin Sexton. I think that there's certainly a market there in the final year of his contract, making $18 million. He can help a contending team right now, and there's really no reason for the Hornets to hold on to him. They might as well capitalize on his value, especially since they traded away Yusuf Nurkic for him. They got great value on Sexton, and now they can capitalize and maybe get some second round assets for the future and maybe to make other trades down the line because it doesn't appear as if Sexton will be a part of Charlotte's future moving forward. So trade him now, get some assets. I think that his market will heat up over the course of the next 2 weeks. Moving on to another guy I would put right in the middle of whether or not he's going to be traded is Anfernee Simons. I think that for him, it depends on what the Celtics can do in terms of adding a front court piece. Do they maybe get Daniel Gafford? Do they maybe look at a Clippers guy like Ivica Zubac? Or I know I botch his name all the time, Tomer. I'm sorry, I can't say it, but Zubac. And so maybe that's a path where they can dump Anfernee Simons to the Clippers and they get Zubac back there. But that's really the only scenario in which I see them trading Simons is if they can get an immediate front court upgrade to not only help them now, but in terms of next year and the year after that, contending for a title. And then, not that he's the most unlikely guy to get traded. I think that there's certainly a market for Coby White. But when you talk about Anfernee Simons and Collin Sexton, I would rank Coby White last. And that's simply because of the asking price that the Bulls have. I've been told and that other organizations have gotten the sense that they want an unprotected first round pick for Coby White. He's on an expiring deal. He may just be a rental for 3 months for a team. Will anybody give up an unprotected first round pick for Coby White, especially given that there's questions about his defensive versatility? I think that there would be much more of a market for another guy that we're going to touch on, Ayo Dosunmu in Chicago, even though he's in the final year of his contract. He does a little bit of everything. He can be a two-way force. So that's why I think there's a little bit more of a market for Dosunmu than Coby White at this time. But all three of those guys, Anfernee Simons, Collin Sexton, Coby White, they've been linked to the Clippers before, and they've been linked to several teams as we've been reporting at Clutch Points.
More specifically, Anfernee Simons and Collin Sexton, definitely guys who have been linked to the Clippers. And I think it's very important to know that all three guys here are expiring contracts. So the Clippers, if they were to make a move, would not be taking on any long-term salary. It would be giving them short-term depth with the ability to extend or make another move from there. I will say, the Clippers have needed, I would say, some ball handling, some playmaking help this year. Kawhi Leonard has had to do a ton of that. And we're seeing him have his best year of his career scoring wise, rebounding wise. He's just doing everything for them. James Harden, we've seen, has gotten a little worn down of late, shooting, I think, 40% from the field over the last, I want to say, month-ish of the year. So, definitely the Clippers could use some guard help, some playmaking help. But their focus right now is really moving off Chris Paul's contract. They have to find a suitor for Paul in the sense that they also are able to open up salary. I don't believe they want to take back much, if any, salary, so they can keep their roster spot, keep two roster spots open, and be able to convert guys like Kobe Sanders and Jordan Miller. Those are two of their priorities, two of their younger guys who have taken big steps this season towards becoming real rotation players as they've dealt with a ton of injuries. That's just proven to be much more difficult. Trading Chris Paul has proven to be a bit more difficult. Again, as we've reported, because there are certain dominoes around the league that need to fall. Like these other guards that we are talking about, they need to find homes first. And a team that maybe gets left out could find themselves needing a point guard like Chris Paul towards the end of that trade deadline window. So the Clippers, while I'm sure are interested in guys like Sexton and Simons, even Coby White on expiring deals, I think their focus would definitely be to just move off Chris Paul first and be able to open up spots for their two-way guys. Now, Ivica Zubats, um, there's a lot of interest for him around the league. But again, that asking price is pretty high right now. I've heard two first round picks at some point, maybe even a young player as well. So there's a high asking price for Zoo, and for good reason. He's coming off a career year last year. He's been really good this year, um, and so they're asking a lot. And I don't think they have any real intention to trade him. But again, with the right offer on the table, I'm sure anything is possible, as we've seen with many teams making moves around the league. So those three guys, although I'd be surprised if they were to make a move for them, I wouldn't completely rule it out. I think anything is possible at this stage with the Clippers. Another guard I wanted to mention, Malik Monk. You mentioned him earlier with the salary, the 3 years left on his deal that has been troublesome for Sacramento to move. What are some potential avenues or some teams who may be interested in Malik Monk that, again, could use guard help and could use a talented scorer like that?
Well, we mentioned them for Coby White, and this is just a team that has been brought up to me from rival scouts around the league of what they think, and they view the Minnesota Timberwolves as a potential landing spot for Malik Monk, and that makes a lot of sense because the Timberwolves need scoring off their bench. We've seen Monk even recently. I believe it was against the Lakers. He came in off the bench and had a 30-point game. So I think that he can absolutely be a great player in a system run by Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle, where he can come off the bench, be a scorer, give them rest in the second unit, and he can really hold things down since that was the role that they had hoped Rob Dillingham would hold when they drafted him. It just hasn't materialized at that point. So could you maybe trade Mike Conley, Dillingham, and if you have a second round pick, that for Malik Monk, or maybe just those two players are enough to have the Kings give off Malik Monk. Mike Conley goes to the Kings. Maybe he gets bought out to go to a contending team. So I think that that's certainly an interesting destination that's been brought up to me. And another guy on the Kings that we're hearing on the guard market, Keon Ellis. I definitely fully believe that he's going to be on the move before the trade deadline, even though the Kings have pushed back a little about it, saying they want a first round pick. They're not going to get that for Keon Ellis, from what I've heard. If anything, they'll get a heavily protected first round pick like they were offering for Jonathan Kuminga in the offseason. But I think that's going to be second round value. I think you'll get three, maybe even four second round picks for Keon Ellis. But his market is definitely there. There's teams interested in him, contending teams around the league. And on a minimum contract, and he's entering unrestricted free agency, definitely a valuable player there, Tomer.
Yeah, I would be. The Sacramento Kings have a lot of guys I feel like they want to offload, and we've talked about a bunch of them from Zach LaVine to DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk, Domantas Sabonis is a guy we've had discussions about in recent weeks. So feels like their entire starting five, outside of Russell Westbrook, who's on I think a minimum, is kind of on the table here. I wouldn't be surprised if he was too. So I'm very Sacramento's interesting. They feel like they should be serious sellers at the deadline, but again, I think there's a certain order of dominoes that has to fall in order for them to maybe get more active than we're currently seeing them. The last guy that we really want to discuss, and you mentioned him earlier, was a player who plays with Coby White, Ayo Dosunmu, who's I think was one of the best 3-point shooters this season. Where are the Bulls? The Bulls have a lot of guards. I mean, with Josh Giddey, Trey Jones, Ayo Dosunmu, Coby White. Where are they on Ayo Dosunmu specifically and his future with the franchise?
Well, I think that it goes back to what we've talked about, Tomer, where they have a lot of guards, and why would you keep all these guys? Because you can't have four guard lineups, you can't have five guard lineups. You have Trey Jones. Do you look to move him? You have Coby White. Is he going to be traded? Ayo Dosunmu, will he be traded? So one of those guys I have very high belief is going to be on the move before the trade deadline. And when we talk about a market for Dosunmu, there haven't been definitive teams that are pursuing him. It's just more of scouts and agents and team executives kind of putting together pieces of what teams out there are looking to make an upgrade, who could make a maybe a buy low move for this guy and give up some draft compensation without really tearing apart their core. And three teams I want to mention that have come up, and there's been plenty of them. There's even more than these three teams that have come up, but these are three very interesting situations to me. The first is the Detroit Pistons. We've heard that the Pistons want to keep together their core. They're in first place in the East right now. Do they maybe add a dynamic two-way guard like Dosunmu who can come off the bench, provide depth, and really bridge the gap between Cunningham and that bench, and maybe some things that Jaden Ivey does there? So I would keep an eye on them making a small, big buy move like that. I think that the Orlando Magic as well could be a potential landing spot for Dosunmu given their injuries and their backcourt needs. Maybe they look to move off of Tyus Jones and they package him with some second round picks for Dosunmu. And then another one, I think this is going to surprise many people, but another team that scouts have brought up is the Houston Rockets. And we know about their backcourt needs. We know that they're a team that focuses defensively with Ime Udoka's philosophy there. And so could they maybe bring in another guard for a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith who just has not worked out? He does not look healthy there. And would they maybe look to move off his contract for a guy like Dosunmu? So it's not saying that those three teams are actively pursuing him or the Bulls guard, but I think that those are three logistical destinations that have been brought up to me by league personnel, and it tends to make a lot of sense when you think about it.
Interesting. Ayo Dosunmu, again, one of the best three-point shooters in the league. Bulls just have too much depth at that guard position, so I would be intrigued to see who can nab him. Again, there's just so many guards available right now from Ja Morant, Immanuel Quickley, Collin Sexton. Like there's it's a long list of guards that are could potentially be on the move this deadline. So, um, yeah, very intrigued to see what ends up happening. That is our show. That is our week episode of Clutch Scoops. As always, Tomer Azarly, that's Brett Siegel. Thank you guys for joining. We will have more for you next week, same time, same place, unless a big move happens, in which case we may have to have an emergency show. But stay tuned. We'll keep you posted on that. Thank you guys. We'll see you soon.